Hi, my name's Andy. We've got a lot of work ahead of us today. We're going to take this T5 transmission and we're going to swap out my 4-speed T10 transmission in my 1966 Mustang. So let's get started. Before we get started, let's go over all the parts that I have gathered up here and kind of explain maybe the process of what we're going to do to get this car swapped out. So this, first off, this is the T5 transmission that came out of a 2001 Mustang V6. And I believe all of the T5s from 83 to 04 will easily work in these cars, except in 94, they made a change to the input shaft length here, and you have to get that converted, and then you've got a speedometer thing, which we'll go over in a minute. If you can stick with the 83 to 94 T5s, it'll be cheaper and easier to do. I didn't do my homework on that, and it was an impulse buy getting this T5. I knew I wanted one, but I didn't realize that an 01 T5 will work, but it's going to take additional parts. So let's go over that real quick. The input shaft on the T5 is longer than what will work without a different bell housing. I have a brand new bell housing here that I got, but I got that one to size with the correct input shaft length. I had to get a new input shaft and this new bearing retainer on here to get to the right length so that it puts this transmission with this bell housing. You can get a longer bell housing to go with it, but if I were you, I'd recommend just sticking with this setup. Another problem with this particular T5 is it has a digital, essentially, speedometer, whereas the 83 to 94 T5s have a mechanical gauge in here, just like the speedometer gear and stuff that I had done in a previous video in my car. I had to swap that gear out when I did the rear end. This one, it's got a sensor that you need to talk to your speedometer with. Well, if you have a mechanical speedometer, like I do, you get to buy an extra box that converts this signal into a spinning mechanical drive that will spin the speedometer in your dash, unless you want to upgrade your dash. I guess I could have done a different speedometer instead of this, but then that would require me to do the dash, and that would have been more expensive than buying this unit. This transmission didn't come with this plug, so I got to buy that. Also, it didn't come with this. This is the reverse light plug. It's the same, more or less the same concept as what we've got in this car. I just need to essentially wire it up the same, so there's nothing really different there. The transmission mount, the cross member, because of where this thing sits in the car relative to the stock cross member, you need to get a different mount. There's several different kinds out there. It just positions, I believe that this mount is actually just a little bit farther back than the stock spot. So I went ahead and got a new transmission mount and the cross member to go with it. So we'll take this setup off and we'll put this on, put it in its place. From there, you need to do, I believe you can use the automatic, the C4 driveline out of these cars. Most of you have probably read or heard that you need to cut that length down. I went ahead and I was reading up on people taking the drive shaft out of the police interceptor, the aluminum drive shaft. And because you have to get them cut to length anyways, or ideally you either buy a brand new one that's the right length or you get your drive shaft cut to length, I'll just get an aluminum drive shaft and cut it to length. Another snafu with this, I had to buy a new yoke, I had to buy new U-joints, and then the shaft on the drive line was damaged, so I had to buy a new tube and weld the ends on, and in the end, I'm still probably ahead, but I might have been better off just buying a brand new steel shaft, which would have been cheaper, or aluminum shaft would have been a little bit more expensive, but I'm glad I got the aluminum shaft. It's probably overkill for my application. I don't need something this light, but you never know where we're gonna go down the road. And you also need to do the, well, you don't need to. In mine, I'm choosing to do the clutch cable conversion. You can maintain the mechanical linkage in these cars. You need to make sure you get the right setup with the clutch and the throw lever and all that stuff to go with it, but I'm opting to go with the mechanical linkage. Therefore, I need a conversion kit to convert mine. I'll get rid of that Z-bar that's in there and put this cable setup in there. Some other new parts. I went ahead and got a new block-off plate. The one that's in there is aging, and this will just match perfectly with the bell housing. I don't know enough on the bell housing if the one I have would have been a perfect fit for this now that I've got this input shaft changed. But I went ahead and just stayed safe and bought the new parts, and we're good there. I got a new clutch, a new flywheel. So my flywheel, I have the 160 tooth flywheel on mine. That's 157 tooth. I believe in 67 or somewhere that they changed from 160 tooth to 157 tooth. I believe the OD is the same, but the tooth size is fractionally different so that you have fewer teeth, so they're just a pinch fatter, just a little tiny bit. Again, just to keep all this stuff working and make it happy, I went ahead and got a new flywheel, 10-inch clutch to go with this, and I had to get a new clutch because of the, using this type of throwout bearing and stuff set up in here with the cable set up and not the mechanical linkage. I needed to get a new clutch. Other parts, new flywheel bolts, got to do those, and new clutch bolts. You got to put those in when you're replacing those parts. And then I could have used the clutch or the shift lever that I have in my car, but I went ahead and opted for a new one. The boot I have is torn, so I went ahead and got a new boot. And then I did want a new shifter ball to illustrate the extra forward gear that we have. And then this transmission takes ATF fluid, even though it's a manual transmission. So I went ahead and got some ATF fluid, and it's just under 3 quarts of fluid. So we're good there. And I also elected to replace the shifter mechanism, just upgrade with a brand new piece here. The boot and stuff was tired on the old one, so just got a new piece for that. Other than that, that's all the parts. It's just a lot of work from here. So let's get started. Before we get the car put up on jack stands and get it set to pull this transmission out, I got to pull the headers off. We got to get the Z-bar out of there. And there's also, for the cable clutch that we're going to be putting in, there's a bracket that has to go on the firewall here, and we have to drill a hole. So you have to take this master cylinder off of the firewall. I'm hoping I don't have to undo the lines to then I have to bleed the brake system. So we're going to try to unbolt it and see if we can do it without having to disconnect the brake system. And then, like I said, we got to get the Z-bar out of there. We're going to get the headers off. They're probably not going to be in the way, but we're going to go ahead and get them out of there. And I think that's all we really need to do up here before we get the car jacked up and then work on it from underneath. So we're going to start on the passenger side first. It's the easiest side. We'll go ahead and pull all the spark plug wires off and get them out of the way. All right, we'll leave the last one in, just in a couple of threads, just to kind of hold this header in place so when I unbolt it from the bottom, this whole thing doesn't fall on my head. And just like the other side, we're gonna pull the spark plugs out and then undo the bolts, and we'll just leave one in the end just to hold the header in place while we work on the bottom. We also need to go ahead and take the spark plugs out to get these headers out. They're just, tips of these are just a little bit in the way. Next thing we're going to want to do is take these two 9/16 bolts out of this master cylinder so we can pull it away from the firewall, because we got that bracket that we're going to have to mount up. We also have other bolts in here that we're going to have to loosen up too, but we'll see what we need to do with respect to that clutch pedal assembly, if I have to pull that out or not, and we'll figure that out when we get to there. But for right now, we'll just do these 2 bolts. The next step is to get underneath the dash and disconnect this master cylinder from the brake pedal, and then we can continue to move it out of the way. All right, now that we got the car up on jack stands, we can go ahead and finish taking the exhaust off and get those headers out of the way. And then we can go down and disconnect the drive line from the rear end and pull that out and start working on dismantling the transmission from the car. We'll take this last bolt out here. It's holding up the header. And now we can drop it down To get the driver's side out, we have to do a couple more things. We got to get this Z-bar out of here. There's a couple of nuts right up here on top that hold the bracket in, that hold the Z-bar in place. And then we got to take the spring and make it the mechanical linkage connection off of here, off of the clutch. We're gonna use a 9/16 wrench, and they're just out of sight here, but there's 2 bolts, and we'll loosen them up, and that'll loosen the bracket up. All right, this is what the bracket looks like. I had recently replaced the bushings and stuff on here, so everything looks fresh and new on here. Yours might look a little more worn out. But we're not gonna need this anymore with the new cable clutch system. All right, don't forget to pull this cotter pin right here on the Z-bar. Once you pull that out, then you can pull the rest of the Z-bar out of the way. We also have this spring that we gotta pull out of the way. This is help holding the clutch lever in place with that Z-bar. And then the new setup, we won't need to use this spring. Okay, now we can pull this whole rest of this mechanism out of here. There is a pin on the side of the block that the Z-bar pivots on. And there is the Z-bar, and it's out. You'll want to go ahead and remove the pin on the side of the block, because we're not going to need that for the new cable clutch mechanism. All right, we just removed this last bolt that's holding the header in place, and then we can drop it below. And just like that side's out now too. This is that pin that you want to get off the side of the block. You just pull this felt washer off, and then you can get to the 9/16, and then it just unthreads out of the side of the block. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I do need to take off this shifter boot and get everything disassembled up here so that we can drop the transmission without having to come back up here afterwards. Now the way this is attached, it might be just easier for now to just leave this. We'll take the shifter ball off, but we'll just leave the shift lever attached. When we drop the transmission, we'll just feed it through the hole. Don't want to forget to drain the transmission before we pull this out of here. In order to get the drive line out, we need to go ahead and disconnect it from the rear end. So we'll just take these nuts off, these U-bolts, and then we'll be able to pull the drive line out of the transmission. Make sure you hold on to this hardware because you're going to need it when you put the new drive line in. We won't need the reverse switch that I had recently put in, but we will need the wiring to hook up to the new transmission, so we'll just disconnect that and let the wires dangle for now. Also, we need to unhook the parking brake system so that we can get ready to take apart the cross member. Now we can go up to the 11/16 bolts, or the nuts that hold on the transmission to the cross member. Next we'll do the 4 5/8 bolts that are holding the transmission onto the bell housing. And we'll leave the bottom 2 in just a little bit, just to kind of hold everything in place until we take the last transmission cross member bolts out. We also need to get the speedometer cable out of the side of the transmission too. That'll hold things up. All right, now we're gonna try to pull this cross member off. We've got bolts on either side that are bolted up into the chassis, into the frame. So we'll take those out. We've got a floor jack underneath the transmission to hold it in place. And I'm doing this by myself, so this might be a little bit of work for me, but if you guys have somebody to help you, you're probably better off if you can have two sets of hands to pull this out of here. So now that we got this thing freed up, from here it's just kind of backing it up out of the bell housing and then lowering it with the jack and just kind of working your way back. It might take a little bit of finessing, but we can get it done. All right, I had to make some adjustments here. I took the shifting mechanism off the side of the tail shaft and disconnected the shift linkage, because trying to pull this transmission out, you have to come away, come towards the camera, come away from the block, because of the input shaft that sticks into the clutch and the flywheel and stuff. So you have to come a long ways back before we can go down, and the shifting mechanism would have hit the hole up inside. So we went ahead and disconnected all of that off of here. And now I think we can go ahead and start to move the transmission backwards and then down. Okay, we got it out. It wasn't the prettiest, but that's okay because we're not going to use any of these parts again, so I don't have to worry about alignment and that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and let's get the bell housing off. We got 6 5/8 bolts holding this on. We'll start with the top 2 because they're the hardest, and then work our way around. Do notice that the 4 bolts on the 2 sides there are the long ones. The short bolts go on top. There's only 2 of those, so keep track of those. We can also, I think we can remove the throwout bearing here, get that out of the way so it doesn't fall apart on us. Now this should just come off. It takes a little bit of moving, but a little finesse. There are pins on both sides that are holding this on, and that's what's holding it in place right now. Oh, that and probably the starter. Get the starter off. Okay, while I was unbolting the starter, I was just trying to do it real quick so I didn't have to slow things down, reposition the camera. Anyways, went ahead and bolted that, and the bell housing just fell right off. I guess I'm glad the camera wasn't in the way, but well, now that's out, we can go ahead and get it moved. The next step will be to take off the clutch, and then we'll take off the flywheel. Okay, this is heavy. There we go. All right, we're okay. Some of these bolts are really oily, which tells me that whoever was in here last didn't put some Loctite on there to seal these up, because the holes in the crank go right into the oil pan, and so the oil that's in there goes right under these, and it can get past these bolts, and it can cause a leak, and it make it look like you have a rear main seal leak because there's no Loctite on these. So we'll make sure that we do that when we put this back together. We're gonna go ahead and wipe everything down while we're in here. Since we've got access to this back of the motor, we'll just get it cleaned up and get it degreased and ready to go. We're also going to come over here and remove these plugs, which gives me access to the seat. And because I have to mess with the clutch pedal, let me turn this so it's right side up. There we go. We need to get these bolts or these nuts off the bottom of the seat so we can pull the seat out, because trying to get underneath the dash in these cars is ridiculous. And if the seat's out of the way, it'll make it a lot easier to get to that clutch pedal. And don't forget, we need to take the pilot bearing out. So put this guy in there, and then this just slides back, and it'll just pull the bearing out, just like that. All right, that's going to be hard to show underneath the dash here. What we've got here's the steering column, and what we need to do is we need to take off the brake switch, and there's a cotter pin in here that we'll need to pull that. And then we can pull the rest of that brake master cylinder out of the firewall that we disconnected earlier. And that'll free that up. And then we need to come over here to the clutch side. So we need to take off this pin right here that holds the clutch mechanism that goes out the firewall. We already took off the Z-bar. And then we need to get this clutch arm out of here and get that spring off there. We're not going to use the spring anymore, so we need to get that out of the way and get this clutch arm freed up so that we can bolt on the attachment for the clutch cable setup. All right, so we took that cotter pin off of the brake mechanism for the plunger for the brake master cylinder, and then this is just the brake switch. I just tucked it up out of the way for now. We'll put it back on when we're done. In fact, we'll reuse all the brake stuff when we're done here. We just need to get it unhooked to get that master cylinder off the firewall. And then on this side, we got that pin pulled out of here, and now this clutch, there's the end of the thing, so that can come out of the firewall. Now we can go out into the engine bay and pull that out, and we can come back in here and mess with the rest of this clutch pedal. All right, now we can pull this master cylinder all the way through, and if you're lucky, the plunger can come out of the master cylinder and separate the two halves here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we can just let that dangle down below, and we'll just hold on to this part of the brake, and then we'll put it back together when we're done. Now we can pull the rest of that clutch mechanism out of there. So this is the other part of the Z-bar. So this goes through the firewall, connects to the clutch pedal, and then connects to the Z-bar. So we no longer need this piece. Okay, now that we get this out of the way, we still need to take off these two bolts so we can put that bracket in place. We also need to take the speedometer cable off of the back of the speedometer because we're no longer going to be using that. So we'll move this tack out of the way, and we can get this dash out of the way. And we can feed the speedometer cable back down underneath the car and pull it out from underneath. All right, so here it's come out from underneath the car. Then we can just kind of fish this whole thing through, and we'll put this off to the side. There's no reason to junk this cable, but we will not be using it with the new setup. We're gonna have a new speedometer cable and no longer use that. We gotta get this spring out of the way, the clutch spring, the return spring that's inside here. We gotta get that out, and so if we take these bolts right here that are right next to the right above the steering column, there's 3 of them. If we take those out, then we can release the mechanism that's holding the spring in place. All right, so we got that bracket unhooked, unbolted from up top.
those 3 bolts they're 1/2 inch. They're kind of hard to get to, but once you get them all out, I would take the 3 of them. There was 2 kind of underneath the shaft and 1 off to the side. I would take this one up closest to the front, or to the driver's seat first, then the one behind it, which is towards the firewall, and then the last one that was right here off the edge. That's kind of probably the best way to do that. And then once you get the spring out of there, you can kind of fish it through, and we won't need this spring anymore, so we don't need to worry about it, but we do need this pedal, and I think we could just go ahead and leave it in place while we bolt up the new bracket.
Oh, okay, well, that takes care of everything that needs to come out of the car. We've got the transmission out, driveline out, bell housing off, the clutch and the flywheel out, and we've got underneath the dash and got the clutch return spring out of there, and the speedometer cable. I think we got everything out of the car that needs to come out. Now it's just time to put stuff in. I'm gonna do a little bit of cleaning, kind of some organizing with some wires and stuff before I start putting some stuff in. But from here, we just gotta do everything on the reverse. And so that'll be the next video. So this is part 1 of part 2, and we'll put the transmission, we'll put the new T5, well, new to me, T5 in, and then we'll get everything hooked up. All right, guys, if you liked the video, give me a thumbs up, and if you'd help me out and subscribe, I'd appreciate it. It helps my channel. All right, thanks for sticking with me. We'll see you in the next one.